Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Terra Roam. On the 2nd of May in 2018, Terra became the first woman to walk 17,000 kilometers solo and unsupported around Australia. This challenge took her 4 years to complete. During this podcast, Terra is going to share more about her life, the decisions that she's made, what she's learned along the way. Please note, we do talk about mental health issues from depression to PTSD and attempted suicide. Please make sure that you're in a strong place in order to listen to this episode. We don't go into any of the real details, but please just be aware that these subjects are going to be coming up during this podcast episode. Hi, Terra.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I am fabulous, thank you. Where are you based at the moment?
I'm writing a book while based in Adelaide Hills.
Oh, fantastic. That must be amazing. It must be quite strange sort of being in one place for a while now.
It's not easy. I tend to go a bit mad after 1 month in one place.
So 1 month is the maximum time before you start thinking, right, what's next? What am I going to do?
But that's right. I'm planning the next expedition, which is a 2-year ride. So that's a good distraction at the moment.
Oh, gosh, that's going to be fantastic. So, Terra, before we get into all of that, just tell people just a little bit more about you and your background.
Okay, my name is Terra Roam. That's the name that I've given myself. It's my legal name, Terra Roam by name and nature. Just 2 months ago, I finished 17,200 kilometre solo unassisted walk around Australia. But I've pretty much been adventuring, trekking most of the last 30 years of my life.
I mean, massive congratulations. That is a huge feat. And obviously we're going to talk about that a little bit more in more detail a little bit later on. But you said you've been adventuring for a long time now. So I'd love to go back to your childhood and hear more about, where you grew up, what family life was like.
Well, I started wandering through the bush when I was a child. So as soon as I could crawl, I was out on the road, making my way down the road when my parents had their backs turned. And then we were surrounded by bushland where I grew up. So I spent a lot of time in nature, and I allowed nature to teach me and guide me. Sometimes I look back and wonder, how on earth did I survive that? Because I would try eating the things that the animals were eating, and I would just wander, focus just on the ants or on a fox track or something like that through the bush, and just wander all day until it was time to go home for dinner. So I did this until I was about 17. There was a bit of sailing, body surfing, kayaking, windsurfing, a few other different activities in there, a bit of riding as well. Then I moved down to the snowy mountains in 1988, I was 16. So I switched all of the water sports for snow sports, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing. I had a great time up there in the mountains.
What was it like for your parents, sort of, growing up in the bush, having you wander off? I mean, do you remember any moments or any stories?
So long as I was back for dinner, it was okay. They weren't too worried. I was quite confident in the bush, and the bush was a fairly safe environment. No bears or wolves or snakes is about the only thing we had to worry about in that bushland. So they were quite happy to let me wander as a free-range kid. And then in my teens, I was a lot more confident, especially with the trail running. I started trail running in the mountains, and I could defend myself as well. So I think that gave my parents a little bit more comfort, knowing that I was out there by myself. And it was also my natural environment. It was the place where I felt most at home. And when you're in your teens and you're going through all those hormone changes, it was a great place for me to go out and just talk to the bush and share my problems with the animals out there. And just as a sounding board, walking out in nature.
You spent some time in Australia. Now, I think you went and you've done a lot of traveling. When did you first start heading further afield? How did that start for you?
I joined a theatre troupe, and I was 19. We went across to New Zealand. I spent 6 months travelling with a theatre troupe in New Zealand, North and South Islands. And when we went doing our workshops and performances, we had free time to go out and explore. So I became addicted to travel and discovering new places just at 19, and caught the travel bug, of course. And from that point on, whenever I had enough money put aside or I was in between jobs, I would take off overseas and explore a little bit more. A lot of Southeast Asia, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and a little bit of Europe and North Africa. And sometimes it's just exploring a city, and that in itself, in a different culture, is an adventure. And sometimes I get right out there into the mountains and the desert.
So where did the idea come from to want to walk around Australia?
Again, when I was 12, a lot of things happened when I was 12. It was quite an influential year. I read Robin Davidson's book, Tracks, which has also become a movie. But the book, you have to read the book. There's so much more in it. It goes into more depth into her internalizing the self-awareness she experiences while she's preparing for and walking across Australia. She walked from the centre of Australia to the west coast. She took a dog and some camels with her. But when I read this, my 12-year-old heart just said, this is what I'm going to experience in my life as well. The way she was completely in tune with her surroundings, her connection with nature, as well as the solitude, how she described the solitude, not just the loneliness, but the awesomeness of it. The awesomeness is what appealed to me. So I said when I was 12 I would do something like that. And I have over the years. I started doing solo overnight walks in my teens in the mountains, and those solo adventures grew in length and deeper into wilderness, so that I was far more alone each time I went out. And I became quite unwell, mental illnesses, depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was hospitalised after trying to take my life in 2010. And my psychologist pointed out to me how much I had been using adventure, especially walking in the bush and solitude in nature, as therapy over these years before I was diagnosed, and said, this is your therapy. This is what you have to do. Go home each week and walk. So on one of these little walks, it was just a short country walk, I remembered this dream I had of walking across Australia or around Australia. And after doing some research into the state of mental health in Australia, I realised that the services in remote and regional Australia are very poor. And there's not much out there. And mental illness is very high. So I thought, if I can use my story of recovery, even though I'm still very much in recovery, if I can use that story to go out there and encourage other people to seek help, they may recognise their own story in mine, and what I did to get help and to recover from mental illness might encourage them to go out and do the same. So I did it. I decided to walk around Australia and share my story as I went. And it was about the first 16,000 kilometres I walked for suicide prevention. I called it the Happy Walk for hope, health and happiness.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and being so open and honest about it. I mean, if we go back to, there's a couple of really interesting things that you said there. You've talked about the alone time. You've been talking about using nature as therapy, which sounds incredibly powerful. And also, obviously bringing awareness to mental health. Going back to 2010, were you still walking at that point, or is that something that had stopped in your life?
It had stopped. I 2 years before that, I started doing awareness walks for environmentalism, conservation. And one of the walks I decided to do for shark conservation in southwest Western Australia, which was still like the capital of commercial shark fishing. I pretty much threw myself in the deep end with that one. At the time, the government had introduced a payback scheme to try and encourage shark fishermen to switch to a different industry or a different part of the fishing industry. And I thought, well, my walk will raise more awareness and encourage people, educate people more on the conservation of sharks, which sharks are endangered and threatened, and to want to protect them instead of cull them. So, yeah, I went over there by myself to walk 1,400 kilometres through all the towns where they operate shark fishing. It became quite volatile. I had people throwing stuff at me, stalking me through towns, like throwing glass bottles out of car windows as they drove past me, death threats. Without a backup crew, I became too vulnerable during that walk, so I had to get back to the East Coast. So I abandoned that walk about 400 kilometres into it, and then that's when I became quite sick. I did attempt, I completed a few more shorter walks after that, but with each walk, my mental health was deteriorating faster and faster, and a lifetime of trauma and depression had built up to a point where I could not cope any longer, and I cracked. And that's when I went into hiding. I stopped walking. I started eating. And, then it pretty much came to a climax. And thankfully, I reached out for help just in time to survive, and someone was able to help me.
Yeah. Oh, God, I'm so sorry that you've had to go through that and go through that experience. But I'm also really pleased that your therapist sounds using nature as therapy, because I'm sure many people might not necessarily believe in that and might want to go down the medication route, and medication is absolutely fine as well, but using nature as therapy, I mean, when she said that, did that sort of click with you straight away and start thinking, yes, that is what I need to be doing?
She was my fourth therapist. I went through 3 others before I found her, because I was insisting on doing it naturally. I was scared of medication because I'd heard so much bad stuff about it. I was like, I don't want this in my life. I already have a weight problem. I don't want a bigger weight problem on top of the problems I'm already trying to deal with. So I went through 3 different psychologists and counsellors who were trying to push me to take medication, and were not able to give me the time that I needed to talk through this. Like once a month is not enough when you've just come out of hospital after attempting to take your life. So I needed someone who had the time to help me. And I found Bronnie. I needed to drive an hour to get to her, because we were both rural in different regions. But she was very different, very compassionate. She came at the counselling from an experienced perspective of her own. So she recognised different things that I was going through, but the main thing was sitting down and doing a timeline. And I had to write down all the highlights in my life, and they were all adventure, hiking, bushwalking, kayaking, snowshoeing, skiing, traveling. And she said, look at all these highlights. This is what boosts you. This is what you love to do. And obviously it's good for your health. So she encouraged, that's how she tapped into it. And it resonated. It was very true with me as well. Once she pointed it out, I could see clearly what she was talking about.
That must have been actually incredibly powerful. I can just imagine, this sheet of paper, and it was, walking, hiking, traveling. You can see all these high points, and then all the the low points down below might have been working, or based in the city, or not doing well. So, how long from 2010 was it before you decided that you wanted to do this challenge? How long did you give yourself in terms of either training or preparation? And was it something that you really had to think a lot about?
It was about 2 years. So I made the decision. At the time I was with someone, and we were going to go around together. He was going to be my support vehicle. And that fell through. And rather than abandon the whole project, I then concentrated on being able to do it alone, without any support vehicle at all. And it worked so much better than planning to do it with someone. And so about 2 years. At first I thought, oh, that'll take a year to prepare for with a support vehicle. How easy is that? And then when I had to abandon that idea, I decided to add an extra year of preparation for myself, and also I did a few test walks, training walks, longer distances like the Larapinta. I designed my own 150-kilometre coastal trek along the Sydney coastline as well. And through those 2 walks, I realised I had a little bit more work to do psychologically before I was ready to actually get out there. It was a bit touch and go for the first leg of the walk, which was around Tassie, and I had to take a little bit of time off to recover after a couple of relapses. But about 2 years of preparation and savings as well. It took a lot of money to walk around Australia for 4 years.
No, absolutely, I can imagine. And I'd love to talk about the finances in a little bit more detail. But I just want to go back to your feelings in terms of, obviously when you were walking previously, you'd had bottles thrown at you. It wasn't a very supportive and a very sort of challenging situation to go through. Were you scared that something was like that was going to happen again?
No, I chose a different cause, and I walked with a different name. So my walking name for 4 years of this, for 16,000 kilometres of this walk, was Terra Lira, which is not the name that I used when I was walking for shark conservation. So I was hoping that no one would be able to identify me as the woman that was trying to stop all the commercial shark fishing. So for a different cause as well that more people could relate to. And I also wanted to help people because people had helped me a lot. So I wanted to be able to give back to society, to humanity. So that was part of my focus, and because I was totally entrusting myself to people, I couldn't allow any room for fear in there at all. If I was scared for a moment, I don't think I would have started.
Yeah. Let's just talk a little bit about the money side of things. I mean, are you working in a job? I mean, how did you afford to pay for this?
I've had some pretty lucrative jobs. I've worked in the police, in security, and on ships internationally. So as an officer, I had a bit of savings put aside, and when that ran out, I sold everything that I had of value, including my old 1972 Combi camper van, and that was a hard one to part with. But that continued to fund the walk, and then when I was about the 12,000 kilometre mark, I pretty much ran dry and started crowdfunding.
How did that go?
That was okay. Also, by that stage too, people started recognising me, and they knew who I was because they'd heard about me, and people were starting to make donations to the walk as well as to the cause. So people would make a donation, and I go, is this for Lifeline or is this to help me? And oh no, to help you. That you buy some food when you get to the next town. And it's like, oh yes. And also around halfway, about 2/3 of the way around, sponsorship. People started becoming interested in helping me out. What would the word be? With gifts in kind, donations in kind. So I had a shoe sponsor for the last 2,000 kilometres, which made a huge difference. But when I ran out of money and I couldn't afford shoes, I had a thong sponsor, a flip-flop sponsor. So about 2,500 kilometres of the walk was in thongs because I couldn't afford to buy shoes. But when the funds ran dry and the crowdfunding was a little bit slow, I just learnt to do without or improvise. Sometimes I foraged for food on the side of the road or in bins or off plates in cafes. But you just make ends meet.
Absolutely. Wow. I'm sort of so gobsmacked. I don't really almost know where to take the conversation next. But let's go back to where you started from, when you started, and setting off. How much of a plan did you have? Did you know it was going to take 4 years? Did you know how much ground you were going to cover every day?
No, actually, when I started, my intention was to do a lot more. I was planning to walk for 7 years and walk to as many regional towns as I could possibly get to, 32,000 kilometres. And when I reached Broome or Derby, I was looking at the whole distance of this and the time that it would take and what I'd already been through. And I thought, I can't do 7 years of this. How about we cut that in half and I'll just do a basic walk around Australia without all the extra detours. I did put a lot of detours into it, but just small scenic detours, more detours for my pleasure rather than detours for the awareness side of it. So the detours were my time out, pretty much, just to go and see a beautiful place that someone had told me about. But it did become quite overwhelming at that point. So Derby was about 9,000 kilometres into the walk, or a little bit less than 9,000 kilometres into the walk. I'd been walking for 2 years. And I read a book by the third person to walk around Australia, Cadogan, and what he went through beyond the point I had reached, I realised, no way, I've got to cut this short. This has to be a simple lap around Australia. And it was a huge relief when I made that decision. But I decided to start with Tasmania, not just because it's the most beautiful state in Australia, but a lot of people tag Tassie onto the end of their walk. It's kind of like the forgotten state sometimes with charity walks or charity runs around Australia. And a lot of people just go across Tasmania instead of around. And I was doing a walk around Australia. It made sense to walk around Tasmania as well. And that was about 10 weeks and 1,250 kilometres with a backpack. And there was a lot of exploring side trips around there, a lot of dirt roads and walking tracks and beaches. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. And then I took some time off to have some tumours removed. I had 3 fibroids, about 8 centimetres each. So I had to wait for surgery, and then after surgery I waited until the next ideal season to walk. The next part of the walk was across the Nullarbor, so that was 3,000 to 4,000. I ended up walking 3,850 kilometres across the bottom of Australia in autumn, winter, spring. So I needed to wait until the ideal season to start that came back around again. So even though I was ready to walk, I had to wait because it would be madness to try and walk across there in the hot season. So each leg of the walk was designed around the seasons and my targets during, or the waypoints during each leg of the walk. I had to reach a certain point at a certain time in the season so that I knew that I could get through the next section or get to the end of that leg before the weather, the climate became too dangerous for walking alone without a support vehicle. Because I was walking with a backpack in the more populated areas of Australia and pushing a barrow through the more remoter sections, about 12,000 kilometres, I pushed a barrow. I had to carry all of my own water from one point to another. And if I had left it too late in the season, I didn't have the carrying capacity for that much water. So that was one of the main points to plan around. But the East Coast was quite easy.
I was going to say, how was your mental health during the trip? I mean, for me, doing the Appalachian Trail, even 2,190 odd miles, just looking at sometimes the whole journey, it would be very overwhelming. And I can't imagine some of the feelings that you must have been going through during that trip. How did you keep strong? How did you keep going?
I love solitude. It's only when my body is exhausted, when I've reached that point of fatigue where it's difficult to go on, that's when the aloneness and the solitude turns into loneliness and isolation. But when my physical health is fine, my mental and emotional health is also fine. Occasionally something would happen or someone would ask a question that would trigger like a flashback or a relapse. When I arrived so for example, after walking almost 3,000 kilometres up the west coast, I arrived in Broome. I let my guard down because I had 2 weeks off. I was early. And previous trips to Broome, I had some bad experiences. So when I let my guard down, I experienced a relapse, a post-traumatic stress disorder relapse. So for 2 weeks, I had to take care of that. But I was very lucky. I met some wonderful women in town who were able to help and support me while I was there. And that was, it's not just the nature. It's not just those amazing vistas, those moments that freeze you on the spot. It's also the people that you meet along the way that adds to the beauty of the whole experience. The amazing, generous, kind, compassionate souls of the humans that you meet along the way. That was a huge benefit. So at those moments when I was struggling the most, they were also the moments when I met the most beautiful people.
Oh, that must have been so powerful getting to meet these people. I mean, are there any other moments which stand out for you from, either individuals that you met or moments while you were out there?
I did have some scary moments. And again, these were physically scary moments, like a moment in time which was out of my control. And but through those, the repercussion was meeting amazing people or seeing people doing incredible things to help me, to support me. For example, on the West Coast, I had I wrote an honest but bad review about a place that I'd stayed at. Their response was, "We're coming up the road with a shotgun to sort you out." I had no idea that they were threatening. I thought that they were for real. And for 3 days, I was really scared that they were actually going to come up the road with a shotgun to sort me out. But I had truckies checking up on me. Motorbike groups and clubs were coming up and down the highway. Like, they would ride 400 kilometres out of their way to come and check on me to make sure I was still okay. People would pull over on the side of the road and give me food. because they'd heard through this incident, a lot of people started hearing about what I was doing and that I was out there by myself and I needed support. So they were there. The support increased a lot after each bad incident. There was a lot more support. The only time that was really completely out of my control was the wild dogs, and that was I had a pack of wild dogs attempt to attack me on a very quite lonely stretch of highway. That particular day, I think like 10 cars went past in the whole day. And the car hadn't gone past for an hour, and then a pack of dogs decided to come down and see if I was an easy meal. Thankfully, they were a bit lazy and they weren't hungry. But yeah, there was no one on the road that day. It was if something had gone wrong, if I hadn't scared the dogs off, I wouldn't be here to talk to you. And the other incident was a truck driver tried to run me down. So the whole way around Australia, I walked on the opposite side of the road to what you ride or you drive. So I was facing into the oncoming traffic as I was walking. And this particular truck driver decided to come up from behind me and move over into the oncoming lane. And I had no idea he was there until seconds before I was able to quickly jackknife my barrow off the highway. And I jumped off the highway and I looked back around at him as he drove past, smiling at me. And every single wheel of the 3-trailer road train on that side of the road train crossed that spot where I'd just been walking with the barrow. It was like this guy had no intention of moving back to the other side of the road. If I hadn't looked around at that moment, I'd just be squashed and spread across the highway. So there were moments where I experienced fear for my life, genuine fear for my life, but there was no fear around that. Like I didn't have any fear for my safety each day as I was walking, because I trusted the people that I was walking with. And each time an incident like this happened, my trust in humanity was reinforced by hundreds more people who were kind and compassionate and caring.
Absolutely. I mean, wild dogs, crazy truck drivers, but incredibly supportive people on your travels. I mean, you talked about, obviously like your physical health, walking every day, making sure that you didn't get fatigued. A huge impact on your body, what you're doing. How did your body cope? I mean, I can't even imagine the hunger you must have been going through, or the amount of calories that you were needing to consume. But talk us through more about that aspect of things.
I'm not a calorie counter. I just listen to my body, and I let my body tell me what it needs. I'm vegan, so I'm plant powered. All of my food comes from fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, mushrooms, all the fresh stuff, as much fresh stuff as I could find. But a lot of these things you can buy dried, muesli bars, spirulina, hemp seeds. There are a lot of fantastic plant-based foods that are full of nutrition. And I would start my day with a breakfast packed full of all the nutrition that I would need for the day. Now, with the calories, I bulked up my body weight before I started each leg of the walk, specifically to lose it as I walked. So, for example, up the West Coast, I started off from Perth and people were saying, "Oh, you're a bit big for an adventurer, aren't you?" Or they'd write comments about she's supposed to be a bit fat. And I would have to reply to them, actually, I'm not that fat, and it's perfectly okay for me to walk like this. I'd like to see you get out there and try it. But After about 2,000 Ks, I had lost 20 kilos. By the time I reached Darwin, which was about 4,100 kilometres, I was underweight. I was below weight. My rations weren't quite adequate to get me through each day. And for the last 1,000 kilometres, I started experiencing that pain when you're starting to. There's not much between the organs inside your body. You can feel them sticking together. So I did go dangerously below weight as I was coming into Darwin. But I knew that my rations would just get me there. If I was going further than 4,000, I would still have had to take a break to bulk up again. But it was the dry season, so it was the end of the dry season going into the wet season, so I had planned to take a break then anyway.
And when you were taking breaks, were you going back home? Were you just staying where you were to like sort of recuperate and, eat all the food possible to get your body weight back? What would you do?
Eat all the food. I'd go back to my mum's. One time I went back to my brother's and pretty much eat them out of house and home. I'd bulk up again to a healthy weight. And then leading up, like as the next section was coming closer and closer, I'd eat more and more. And then, I ate with confidence that I was going to get rid of it again in no time at all. Most people would look at that and go, that's a bit naughty. But I eat well, so I'm not, I eat the junk food, but I also eat all the healthy and nutritious stuff as well. So lots and lots of fruit and vegetables, salads, fresh seasonal foods as well, and then the extra bulking stuff on top.
Did it get harder and harder to continue going out there after sort of every break, every section, knowing what you'd be facing again?
No, not at all. Going back to the red dirt and the spinifex, that was hard. Knowing that I was going back to 36 degrees each day, that's the ambient temperature. The temperature coming up off the bitumen itself would be about between 70 and 90 degrees Celsius. And then the ambient temperature, which I was walking through, was about 50 to 70 degrees. Knowing that I was going back to that was hard, but I also knew I was physically capable of doing this because I already had done it. But the red dirt and the spiny, the little spikes that come off the spinifex, so I wasn't looking forward to going back to those. But over time, you miss it. Time is an incredible thing. It makes those bad moments more bearable, and then happier and happier, and then you start to miss it. So I'm at a point now where I miss the red dirt. And I'm looking forward to getting back out there on the next expedition.
So tell us more, what is the next expedition?
Riding around Australia. So it's not just a ride, though. I'm calling it, the name of the ride is Roam Forever. Roam Forever or Roam Forever. My bike is called Eva. And it's a multi-adventure ride. So as I'm riding around Australia, I'm engaging in local community initiatives, learning about local culture, Aboriginal culture, being introduced to First Nations as I go, and unusual adventures that most people don't think about, like a music adventure in the city, or a food adventure, or urbex going underground or up into old abandoned buildings, those types of things that are a different style of adventure, and documenting it as I go.
Wow, it sounds incredible. How long do you think that's going to take?
2 years. Yeah, at least 2 years.
And when are you hoping to start it?
September.
September. Oh, wow.
So, yeah, hopefully September the 17th. And, finish in November 2020.
And how's the training been going for it?
I just bought the bike. I just bought some insurance for riding, third-party insurance. So I'll start training this week.
Oh my gosh, exciting times.
Yes.
So you're writing a book at the moment. How's that going?
Oh, yeah, it's going. It's slow. It's the book is called Terra Roams, a collection of short adventure stories. And that's exactly what it is. I'm just writing down some short stories from my adventures around Australia and the world. It's a variety. It's not just trekking adventures. It's adventures in the city, in new and interesting cities, adventures in different cultures, just little short moments as well, like one day in an amazing place. So the chapters will vary from 5 pages to 100 pages. It depends on what adventure I'm talking about.
When are you hoping for that one to come out?
I have no idea. when I find a publisher.
Oh, fair enough. And how are you going to be funding the next challenge?
With the book, hopefully.
So therefore it says it's got to come out before September.
Yes, I have Patreon. A Patreon page. People can hop on there. 7 tiers of pledging, of support, from $2 for your basic pledge to $1,000, a minimum of 3 months, $1,000 of pledges, and I will travel anywhere in the world to talk to you and your group about adventure.
Ooh, fantastic. That sounds amazing. So super.
There's a lot of stuff.
There is a lot of stuff. I mean, with what you've talked about, with what you've done, what's coming through is your mental strength, your mental resilience, your determination. Why do you think you are so mentally strong? And I know you might. Do you understand what I mean? But to carry on, to do this adventure, to keep on walking, where do you think that comes from?
Bullheaded stubbornness. I'm also, I don't know, the things that I've experienced in life and the perspective from which I see life, it can be quite different to other people's. I'm Asperger's, so when I get fixated on something, I won't let it go until it's finished. This is what this walk was. I became totally 100% focused on this walk. This walk was my life. For 4 years of my life, it was all about the walk. And no matter what interrupted the walk, whether it was someone trying to run me down on the highway, or dogs, or a broken leg, or a twisted pelvis, no matter how much time I had to take off to recover from each of these things, I had to return because this walk needed to be completed before I could move on to the next thing. And I love walking. I really loved being out there on my own, just in nature, because each day, even throughout the day, the landscape changed. The bird calls changed, the flowers changed, the smells. When the storms came across, the first few storms I experienced were quite frightening, because when an electrical storm comes over, you have no control. You don't know where that lightning is going to strike, or even if there's a tornado in that storm. So you're putting your whole faith in nature. And so far, nature hasn't failed me. Nature is just incredible. The storms pass over and your whole body is tinkling and alive, and your senses are so, they're just sparking. You can feel and see and smell everything around you. It's quite a thrill. And I think it's that thrill that draws me back out into nature.
I'd love you to share a little bit more about Asperger's. Could you just explain a little bit more about what that is and when you got diagnosed and how that impacts on your life?
I was always a bit weird. At 3 years old, I was misdiagnosed with ADD. and I was one of the first kids in Australia to be put on Ritalin back in 1975. And I was on Ritalin for about 3 months, and it completely changed me as a child, and I was a very different character on Ritalin. So my parents said, no, this is not our child. This is not her. So I was very lucky that my parents decided to just raise me and let me be different, and not point out that I was different, but just watch and guide me as I was going through these different things. But there was stuff that went on that they didn't see, like the bullying at school was pretty shocking. But they never stopped me from exploring. I think my parents knew when I was very young that nature was my passion. Nature was where I found refuge, and that was never taken from me. In fact, I was encouraged to get out there more often. Maybe they just needed some time out. But no, my parents were fantastic in guiding me towards nature, towards the outdoors and adventure, getting me on the water, in the water, on the snow, in the bush. But it wasn't until so that they knew I was misdiagnosed with attention deficit disorder, but they still knew that there was something not quite the same. My wiring wasn't the same. I wasn't reacting the same as other children. I could mimic and fit in with other girls at school, but it was really hard work. It was exhausting trying to fit in, to be the same. So I didn't so much care once I left school and went into the workforce, because I was mostly working in male-dominant jobs, where I was different anyway and treated differently as a female anyway. So it wasn't much of an issue for me. But my mum continued to wonder, what is it? What is it that makes my daughter different? And then in my 30s, she read a book called Asperger's, and every page of that was me. She gave the book to me. She said, read that. I was like, oh, wow, that's me. And a few years later, when I was diagnosed with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, social anxiety came up, and I said, I think I'm Asperger's, or Asperger's, however you wish to pronounce it. And my psychologist said, yes, I'm not a she wasn't a clinical psychologist, so she couldn't make a diagnosis. But she said, oh, yeah, you are. And then when I moved towns, I had to see another psychologist who was a clinical psychologist, and she made the diagnosis. She said, yeah, clear cut, you're a female Asperger's. So that has probably helped me a lot in my attitude and my focus. It's not so much naivety, but it's self-confidence. But also, I retain a lot of information around. I learned physically, so any kind of training, survival training, first aid training, rescue training, those types of things. I retain all of that. Everything I do physically is embedded in my memory. So that's also helped my confidence when I go out alone in the wild.
Looking back on the trip, this huge experience, very difficult to even narrow it down, and we could talk about each different section for hours on end. But just reflecting back on the journey for you, what do you think you've learned most about yourself from walking around Australia, from those 4 years, that 17,000 plus kilometers?
Going with the flow, accepting that no matter how many plans you make, ultimately I only have control of what I do, and things change. So you've got the old cliche, change is the only constant in life, and I had to accept that very early on in the walk. I was faced with it almost every week when I had to make changes to my plans. And at first that was frustrating, really frustrating. And then I decided, well, no, let's put some flexibility into this walk, because no matter where you go, you're going to meet people and want to do things that you haven't already planned. So learning to go with the flow, learning to accept change as the normal. Yes, no matter how many plans you make, a lot of other things going on around you to change those plans.
Absolutely. What advice would you have for other women out there who are wanting to take on a big challenge or to do something outside of their comfort zone, do something a little bit different from the norm?
Oh, just do it. One of the hardest things for me it was very hard for me to be diplomatic about this while I was out there and patient about it. It was when people asked, aren't you scared? I began turning that question on them as like, what are your dreams? Why aren't you going out and achieving your dreams? Not because I'm scared. It's like, well, why do you think I'm out here achieving my dreams? Because I'm not letting my fear get in the way of what I want to do. So don't let fear get in the way of anything, and don't let other people's fear squash your dreams. You want to do something, you design your life around that dream and do it.
Oh, absolutely. I need to re-clip that bit and just play that over and over and over again and hope people hear and get that message. Terra, where's the best place for people to find more information out about you, your past adventures, your future adventures?
I have a website called terraroams.earth. And I have a bit of a portfolio on there, and a profile on there, as well as links to Facebook, Instagram, and the Patreon page.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that I put all of the links to your website, to your Facebook, your Instagram and Patreon on the website as well, so people can come and follow your incredible journey. But Terra, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast to share more about your life, what you've achieved, what you've done, what you've learned along the way. You are an absolute inspiration.
Oh, you're a legend. I love the way you interview the most amazing women. I have your podcasts on my iPod, and when I go out walking the dog while I'm taking a break writing the book, I put my iPod on and I listen to these incredible women you're interviewing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Hey Tribe, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Terra and it's inspired you to go and do some more walking. I just want to give you a couple of podcast recommendations to inspire or to continue the inspiration, because I've spoken to a lot of women who have loved to go and do some walking. I myself have walked the full length of the Appalachian Trail, 2,190 miles in 100 days. You can listen to my podcast episode on that. You can also watch all of the vlogs on the YouTube channel, which is at Tough Girl Challenges. But I've also spoken with Lindsay Cole, who's an adventurer and storyteller, and she walked the length of the rabbit-proof fence in Australia. We've spoken with Katie Jane Pinnery. She's a model turned adventurer, and she walked the entire length of the Great Wall of China. Fiona Quinn walked Great Britain, 993 miles, solo and unsupported, over 57 days. She then went and cycled the challenge, and then most recently she has just supped the full challenge. So incredible woman, very inspirational. And we spoke to Fiona at the very beginning of this year, so she shares more about the challenge that she's just currently completed. We've talked with Anna Blackwell, who's walked 500 miles and 1,000 miles across France and Spain. Zoe Langley-Wathen, whose walking adventures include the Southwest Coastal Path, Wales Coastal Path, and Offers Dyke. Lots of great tips, lots of information, and Zoe is an incredible storyteller. She has the most incredible voice to listen to. It's a very hypnotizing podcast, well worth listening to. Alex Mason, she quit her job in 2015 and through hiked the PCT, not only once in one direction from Mexico to Canada. After she did that, she flew home, started work again, decided she didn't like her job anymore, quit her job again, flew back out to Canada and walked the PCT again, back down to Mexico. She then flew from Los Angeles over to New Zealand, where she through hiked the Terra Roam trail, and she's now currently out on the Appalachian Trail trail. So you can definitely go and learn more about Alex and the challenges that she's done. To celebrate, I think it was the 2-year anniversary or 100,000 downloads. I can't quite remember which one. I spoke with Cheryl Strayed, who is the author of the New York Times bestseller Wild. So Cheryl, as a mother of 2, she went out and hiked the PCT. She talks very openly, honestly, about her backstory, her journey, why she decided to walk the PCT. We've also recently spoken with Hannah Engelkamp, who walked the 1,000 mile circumference of Wales with Chico the donkey. So loads of great walking podcasts that you can listen to, loads of great stories, lots of advice, lots of top tips to help you with your next walking challenge. If you want to find more information about what myself and Terra have discussed and all these incredible women, then please do go check out toughgirlchallenges.com, which is where you can find links to all the previous podcast episodes going back to 2015. You can find more information about me, my background, the challenges that I've done. You can also find links to Patreon. Patreon is how I fund Tough Girl Challenges, how I increase the amount of female role models, and how I motivate and inspire you to go out and achieve your best. If you go to patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast, you can become a patron, a regular patron, and donate between $2 and $25 a month to help fund the running costs. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you listen to it every week, then please consider contributing. It's the equivalent of buying me a cup of coffee. It's the equivalent of buying me a drink once a month to help facilitate the podcast. And obviously, the more supporters I get, the more podcasts I can put out, the more women I can interview, the more stories I can share, the more inspiration and motivation I can provide for you out there listening, wherever you are listening. Massive thank you to everybody who has been supporting. I couldn't do this without you. New episodes come out every Tuesday at 7 a.m. UK time. Make sure that you do subscribe so you don't miss out at all. Thank you again for listening. I'll be back with you next Tuesday for another awesome episode of the Tough Girl Podcast.